Back here on our program, Jones and Company, and today we are speaking with a outstanding Bahamian pastor who is serving now in Huntsville, Alabama. We ought to be neighborly, and I know that you can give me a sermon on who is thy neighbor and what being neighborly is all about. But you live in the United States. There are some people who are seeking refuge in the United States of America. Is the United States of America being a good neighbor at this time? Because I understand, Reverend Butler, that there are a whole lot of people who are having difficulty getting into the U.S.
So unfortunately, we're in a climate of heightened xenophobia, fear of the other, of scapegoating, of blaming, of victimizing people, stereotyping, et cetera, et cetera. And the base of bigotry and prejudice is being paraded without seeming consequence. And as I listened to Mr. Trump disparage those evacuees with the reference of drug dealers and gangbangers, it only seemed, in my mind, to reinforce what is his white nationalist disposition. My theology of neighbor is a bit more expansive and radical than the average person want to think. I think that God's world is for God's people. Irrespective to these differences of ethnicities, of national demarcations, of territorial borders and boundaries, etc., I think these simply reflect human arrogance for domination that we wish to assign to God, that I believe God wholesalely rejects. The vision in Revelation is not for a people of one ethnicity. It is of every nation, every kindred, every tribe, a number that cannot be numbered. God's power to claim all human flesh, irrespective of the differences that we make and that we lift and exalt as being superior. And in that regard, we have failed. I think the spirit of America, as codified in e pluribus unum, out of many one, is being violated. Persons who, of no fault of their own, are simply trying to survive, having lost all that they have, should be permitted a temporary protected status, as has been the case when humanitarian crises have occurred before. And why there would be a departure from that practice is beyond me. And I think that there ought to be those of us who are of Bahamian descent and identity, who reside in the United States, who are willing to lift our voices to say, this does not reflect the melting pot of America as she presents herself to the world.
You talked about xenophobia, and we are somewhat xenophobic in the Bahamas too. There are many Bahamians who mistreat our Haitian brothers and sisters. In one of the shelters, I understand that 90% or even more of the evacuees of Haitian nationality. Mr. Trump made the point that some of these people who are trying to get to the United States were not wanted in the Bahamas, or they should not have been in the Bahamas. What do you make of that?
So I do not parse his words with that degree of nuance simply because I interpret it as simply his wholesale disparagement of our nation, period. Now, to the matter of our own internal xenophobia, it is interesting. Just two months ago, at the annual convening of the Baptist World Alliance here in New Providence, I presented to the Freedom and Justice Commission a paper on the Bahamian Haitian migration crisis. That is a moral imperative. Now, when I presented that paper, it was mainly directed toward Bahamian Baptists who historically have been on the vanguard for social movements in the country, particularly that of majority rule and independence. And so when you have those distinguished clergymen who are now of blessed memory, having sat around the table when we signed on to the UN Charter, having given the very words to articulate our Pledge of Allegiance, given us the kinds of images of our coat of arms, who gave us the articulation of our moral freedom, even in independence in '73, and R.E. Cooper Sr., et cetera, and those of his generation. I think that there is a moral imperative to help clarify neighbor theology for the nation. And you and I both know that successive governments have failed to address this crisis in a robust fashion so that we can end the posture and the condition of statelessness for many Haitian migrants to the Bahamas. As I have shared with you before, I wholeheartedly reject the label, the moniker of illegal immigrants. I do not believe anyone is illegal. I think on the basis of their humanity, they have dignity and value. They may be stateless, but they are not illegal.
Yes, but I don't want to cut you off here, but if you enter a country and you do not have the proper documentation, you sneak in the death of night, so to speak, and you are hiding out and you've not been regularized, aren't you illegal?
You are undocumented.
You
are in a state of, you are in a condition of statelessness. I would agree with that. The reason I reject the term...
You are breaking the laws of the place where you are because there are immigration laws. And you ought to enter properly and have permission to reside. And so if you do not enter properly and you do not have documentation to reside, aren't you there illegally?
You are there illegally, but you as a person are not illegal. That is my point. And it may sound like parsing words, but I think fundamentally it is a theological principle that if I contravene the law, I am still not given the status to be illegal. I have contravened the law. The act may be illegal, but my humanity can never be nullified. And I think that fundamentally is my premise. We have known of this kind of bigotry for a long time in this nation. As I have grown up here in the Bahamas, one of the worst things that you could have been called when you were arguing with your friends was a Haitian. That's in recent memory. The kind of prejudice, the kind of ethnocentrism that courses through our veins, that can create a culture where we permit persons to be seamstresses and tailors, workers in domestic capacity, but then raise issue when they seem to want what every human being wants, regardless of where we are in the world: a place of security and safety, the right of self-determination, to work, to be independent, to provide for family, to have their ambitions pursue, to develop to the fullest of their capacities. These are the issues that all of us want.
Yes, but haven't people so ignored the rules of the laws of the country, and they have brought a certain behavioral pattern in your country that is offensive, and they're seeking, many people believe, to change the culture And that is offensive to many Bahamians. For instance, when they erect what we call shanty towns or shanty houses and do not care for the environment and take unfair advantage of systems, these things are offensive.
I do not disagree. And I think that they are a matter of good governance that have to be addressed.
Yes.
I don't believe that anyone should live in unsanitary conditions or that their building code should not meet the required standard of the country. These things must be addressed.
Yes, but and when you saw the level of destruction in Abaco with places like the Mud and Pigeon Peas and the farm at Treasure Key, you saw where people erected dwellings that were, some of them, unfit for human habitation.
Yes.
And they did so illegally.
Yes. 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 Yes.
And so shouldn't the Bahamian people guard against this? Shouldn't they fight this? Shouldn't they discourage these things?
Well, they have been a part of our culture even before independence. I think we have to address that they are our brothers and sisters who have escaped horrific circumstances in Haiti, seeking a better way of life. I agree with you that we must deal with it, but we must deal with it in a robust fashion that does not continue a pattern of prejudice and bigotry against the other, because fundamentally it is unchristian. If we claim the status of Christian nation, which many people would really essentially take issue with, though we give lip service to it in the preamble of our Constitution, it means something. It means something. And if you go back as far as the tradition of Leviticus, there is the imperative to be kind to the foreigner, to the stranger who is within thy gate, because there was a time when we were traversing as foreigners in this land. It is a matter of being careful that we do not continue the vicious cycle of victimizing those who have already been victimized. We know Haiti to be the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere, but she has paid for her sins ever since she decided to stand up against oppressive rule. And the nations of the Western world have conspired against her through their foreign policy and continue to profit even off of what is taking place in that nation. And my belief is, if we are not careful, we too could be in a lot like that, but for the grace of God.
But you have no difficulty with the policing of our borders, restraining people from traversing our country in the manner in which the Haitians have been doing over the last 4 decades or so. You have no difficulty with that, do you?
No, I do not. But I do think that we ought to address this crisis out of humanity, a sense of humanity, and a sense of mutuality. They are our brothers and sisters of the Caribbean who are desperately in need of care. Yes, there is corruption taking place there, but let us be honest. We are not immune or exempt from corruption even in these islands of the Bahamas. And because we are bound together in this inextricable network of mutuality, I think we ought to pay attention with our brothers and sisters of the Caribbean toward what happens to that nation.
But, Reverend Butler, it can be argued that the Bahamian people have been very kind and generous with these people, even though we see the various levels, phobias in our country is xenophobia. As a matter of fact, it's Negrophobia as well.
Ah, yes.
And that is the hatred of black people.
Yes.
Don't we see, though, that with the settlement that the settlement of these people was allowed in Abaco and various other parts of the Bahamas, in New Providence, that the governments or successive governments and the Bahamian people have been very accepting
To a degree.
of these people.
And just as you have had people who have been accepting, you have had people who have been vile and who have been prejudiced and who have been bigoted. I mean, as recently as just yesterday, having heard viral clips of persons sending around voice notes about what should be done to those who survived the storm, or what should be done to those who are caught by Defense Force boats in our waters. I mean, those things that do not bear repeating. They also speak of an ugly underbelly to this problem that I think that ought to be addressed to. And I believe that it is a challenge of religious leaders to articulate a moral vision that is compatible with what we desire for our national identity to be. Yeah. For this then seems to be more a matter of economics, because we have given carte blanche to those of Asian influence through finances, red carpet entry, and accessibility, and others who have resources to build private keys, etc. We have no problem negotiating with them, welcoming them. And so we have to be mindful that even as we do that we have a disposition that is humane, that we can say is concomitant with our theological values.
Yes, it's interesting, and that is why I entered the Negrophobia as well, because there is hatred, black people who hate black people.
Yes. Black self-hatred is a real thing.
Yes.
Yes.
I don't think the church has been very effective in dealing with that particular issue.
Most definitely. I think it is one of those vestiges, of colonialism that remains with us.
Of colonialism or slavery?
Of both. Of both. I mean, because colonialism, is just a lighter form of oppression, but it's still oppression. It takes away the right of self-determination, of self-governance, until it is challenged in a robust fashion to allow us to live unfettered as God intends, for freedom, by freedom, in freedom.
Yeah. There are opportunities that have arisen from this storm, and an opportunity really to look at the issues that we are discussing today. On how we treat the stranger in our gates, how we regulate legal as well as illegal immigration in our country.
Yes. Yes, most definitely.
And how we interface with our next door neighbor, and how we ought to guard against our national identity being compromised.
Yes. So if you think majority rule comes about in 67, January 67,
Yes.
April of 67, April 4th to be exact, 1 year before his martyrdom, Martin King stands in the nave of the Riverside Church in New York City. It's the liberal cathedral of American Protestantism. And he challenges America for her atrocities in North Vietnam, and essentially indicts the nation because she had become a thing-oriented society. She had replaced people for material possessions, acquisitions.
It became thingified.
Correct. And he says, if a nation is to be judged, it is not to be judged based upon simple advancements in technology, in the financial indices, etc. It ought to be judged in how it cares for those who are most vulnerable. Now I hear the echoes of the words of Jesus in the New Testament, that a man's life does not consist in the abundance of things that we possess. that there ought to be something deeper about our pursuit that is not just about the dollar, that ought to be about humanity, human beings factoring above profit. And if we can return to that point where we honor the value, the inherent value, and the inherent dignity of human beings, if we put ourselves as being worth it, then the other things I think will follow as a matter of course, because then we have replaced things with what God intended, people. So the economy of God, to go back to what we were talking about earlier, is simply this: God first, then people, things last. Things only factor in the economy of God insofar and inasmuch as they can serve the interests of people who honor their God. And when we have inverted that and put things first, and then people, and then God, we will get a recipe for disaster.
And so this is a fantastic moment for the church to evangelize and to better teach the people of the Bahamas. In the wake of this storm, you have a teachable moment.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
And it has to be embraced.
Yes.
You think it could be embraced?
Most definitely. If you read the work of Walter Brueggemann, a Hebrew Bible scholar, he says that ancient Israel went through this cycle of disorientation, a complete loss of its identity, and out of it, it had to go through a reorientation, right? In order to come forth with a better understanding about how it ought to live subspecie aeternitatis, as the Latins would say, in the light of eternity, under God's divine scrutiny. That if we can come out of this with a clearer moral vision for our nation that honors God, that affirms the value and dignity of human beings, and that puts these material possessions in their proper place for their proper use, for the protection of the common good, then I think we will be better on the other side of the storm.
Thank you so very much. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate your being here today. We thank Reverend Darius Butler for being our guest today. Very illuminating. Thank you. Thank you for watching and listening to our program. Good evening, everyone.